Sintad. I'm joined today by our co-hosts, Blue Nautilus. Say hello, Blue.
Hey, how's everybody doing?
And also by Moonbase Alpha.
Good day, everyone.
And Oski Digi.
Hey, how's it going, everyone?
And of course, Dujay.
Hello.
Now today it's a little bit different because we've decided to do a special kind of one-off episode on a recent release from one of our own hosts. Blue Nautilus, as you might know, has Seaside Modular as a company, and he just released the wonderful Proteus module, the generative musical sequencer, which you've certainly seen mentioned in a few videos. I know DivKit had one, Jeremy Redmeans Recording had one, and I myself had one on my YouTube channel. And we've all been really excited to finally get a chance to talk about Proteus publicly, because we've all been playing with it and beta testing it over the last couple of months. Of course, this isn't going to be an ad for Proteus. We really wanted to get to the heart of what it takes to go from an idea in your head to producing a real modular a product that people are buying all around the world. And who better to help talk us through that than one of our own friends and somebody on this podcast, Blue Nautilus, who's gone through the process. And we all really were interested in hearing both the history behind Proteus, like where it came from, the ideas behind it, but also where he thinks it can go next and what kind of things the community are asking for. So when you're listening along today, don't think of this as a very special ad about Proteus. Think of this more as us kind of discovering what goes into the difficult process of taking an idea from concept to reality in the Eurorack world. But tell me a little bit about kind of the journey to get here, Blue Nautilus. I mean, you know, what kind of was your starting point for wanting to do something like this?
It's been a long journey. I actually started thinking about this concept before I was even into Eurorack. So the initial ideas, you know, the idea behind Proteus was to create a machine that makes melodies that sound good and that repeat. And the idea behind that is that when something repeats, it becomes predictable, and there's a kind of joy in hearing something repeat. But that if it repeats too much, it gets boring. And so Proteus would repeat for a while, and then with some probability, it would eventually change to a new melody. And this was actually written initially as a Python script on my computer, and it would send MIDI notes to Reason. So when I got into Eurorack, I thought it would be kind of cool to be able to drive this thing from my computer, and I would have the MIDI convert into CV, and I would play around with driving synthesizers, hardware synthesizers, with this Python script. And then at some point I decided, well, what if I could actually make it into, put it in the rack somehow? And I started looking into ways of doing that, and I came across the Daisy platform. Daisy, the little microcomputer that was built by the creators of Qubit and eventually became its own business, called Electrosmith. And this is a little microcontroller that is specialized for audio processing. And it comes with a code base called libdaisy. And it had been a long time since I programmed in C++, which is the language that libdaisy is in. So I decided, instead of just going straight to hardware, I would first try to build a software version. And I built a little VCV Rack module using libdaisy. That was the first version of Proteus.
And that was what I was going to ask you about, was because the Proteus that's in VCV Rack is pretty well known, and now even more well known now that the module has come out, the hardware module's come out. And was it a big jump then to go from the VCV Rack version into the hardware version? Was there a lot of corner cases and gotchas that you had to deal with, or was it a pretty easy lift and shift of the code over onto the Daisy on the hardware platform?
In terms of the code, it wasn't too much work, but there's so much extra work involved in hardware, and especially since I had never done this before. I had to learn how to make circuit boards, I had to learn how to make the front panels, I had to spend a lot of time. I bought like every knob there was out there in the universe to try to test which ones I liked the best. There's just so many little decisions that go into making a piece of hardware like this that it was kind of an endless task just dealing with the physicality of it. But on the coding side, it was fairly simple because I had learned that in VCV Rack. I'm so glad I did it in VCV Rack first, by the way. First of all, just in terms of practicing the code, but also in terms of having so many people use it and give feedback on what they liked and what they didn't like and what they wished was there and how they were using it in ways that I wasn't and hadn't thought of. And also providing some kind of motivation, because seeing people make music with it is really the thing that motivates you to go through this long, arduous process. So I'm really glad that I did it that way.
That's something I've heard a lot, especially when I was at Superbooth, when I was meeting people who made modules, was, selling them is fun, is good, but meeting the people who make music with them is a huge amount of fun. One question I had was, if you look back now, would you advise other people thinking of getting into making their own modules to start first coding in VCV Rack? Because if one thing's for sure, there's no shortage of opinions in modular users. Everyone has an opinion about their favorite thing. So is that something that you found very beneficial to engage with the community that way through VCV Rack?
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, you're right. Everybody wants something different. And when you're engaging with the community, there's a bit of you can't please everybody, and you shouldn't try to, but it's good still to know what people want. And there's so many good ideas that did come from the community that are now inside the thing. I mean, very simple things from when I first made the first version, I did not include a reset jack.
You want that.
Just yeah, you want that. Yeah. But I wasn't using that myself, and so I just didn't even think of it. Yeah. Asa, you had a question?
Yeah. Was Proteus actually your first VCV module? Because you have, I think, 5, right? So I was curious if you started with the sequencer, or if maybe Jawari, or there was a different module you actually went with first.
I started with that one, and then once I saw sort of how easy it was to make these things, and it really is pretty straightforward to do, and there's a lot of community support for it. Then I could sort of just use it as a playground for all of my ideas. And most of my other ideas had to do with Indian classical music, because that's my formal background in music training is in Indian classical music. I played the sitar for many years. And so I just wanted to have those sounds available, and so I started to make those as VCV Rack modules. Maybe those will be hardware one day. I don't know.
I just had one question for you. First, congratulations on this thing quickly selling out in a blink. So
yeah, great job,
incredible accomplishment. Since that has happened, presumably people are starting to use it. I was wondering if there are any comments, suggestions, or even perhaps criticism that has surprised you.
It's really early for that, so we just shipped them out this week, and they'll be hitting people's mailboxes in a few days. So I'm sure that'll come. I'm a little bit scared to see what happens. It's a little bit nerve-wracking to put something out in the world. You don't know what kind of bugs people are going to find and what kind of complaints they're going to have. I think the top complaint that people have, which I think is a totally fair complaint, is that it's a lot of HP for just sequencing one single voice. It's 16 HP, yep. And you're just sequencing one track. It's not, some of the other generative sequencers out there, like the Bloom, for example, which is maybe one of the most similar comps that comes to mind when people think about generative sequencers, has 2 tracks, and so you can sequence 2 things at once. But I really wanted to keep Proteus very, very simple. I think that it's very easy to gravitate towards complexity when designing a module, because you just want to put everything in there. You want it to do everything. But when you do that, the user interface becomes harder and harder to use. And for me, when I'm dealing with these modules, you have to realize that this is just one module in a case of modules, and you have a lot of things to know about all of these things. So reducing the cognitive load that's required to use each one was just really, really important to me. And so I wanted to keep it as simple as possible.
That makes total sense. I like the idea that the complexity comes from how you modulate it as opposed to how you interact with the UI. It's very straightforward, almost always knob per function with a single shift, and everything's labeled. So it's pretty straightforward to use.
Well, I think something that a lot of people don't know, obviously we're some of the beta testers, is it went through a hardware revision phase, not just a software revision phase, right? So we did add some complexity in there with the shift functionality and with the USB stick, so you can do the custom scales, etc. So maybe we can talk about that. When did you decide I actually need to make a hardware revision on this.
There were a lot of hardware revisions before you guys even saw it, but that particular one that you're talking about was maybe one of the hardest decisions that I had to make, because I was, because I have this ideal of simplicity, and I really wanted it to be knob per function. On the other hand, the ideas that the beta testers, including you guys, came up with when beta testing it were so compelling that I also wanted to have those in there. And so I was torn, like, do I just keep it simple, or do I add like all of the this one other mode that requires you to kind of flip a switch, and then you have access to these other control functions in the knobs. And ultimately I decided that it just made the musicality of the thing so much more fun to use that I had to include it. And as Moonbase was saying, keeping the labels on the knobs, at least you never have to remember what they do. You can just look at what they do. I still do. It still pains me a little bit that sometimes you have to kind of turn the knob to catch up to the previous position of the other parameter when you're changing the function switch. But you do get used to that, and it's not too bad.
And that's a really common way of setting up a multifunction pot. It's not unique to Proteus for sure.
I mean, that brings up an interesting philosophical issue in Eurorack module design, especially now that we have these super powerful, affordable, and power conservative digital modules like Daisy and a few of the other platforms, is that you can basically build anything you want almost. You're limited only by your imagination and whatever you want to charge for the thing.
And your coding
coding ability, of course. Yeah, once you overcome that, which then can lead to some very overloaded interfaces, shift modes and sub-shift modes. And we all know modules that are like that. They're great modules, but like, wow, you really got to use them every day to have the muscle memory. So I love the idea of kind of coming into this with an opinionated design, like saying, look, these are the basics for me. It's a knob per function. I don't want to overload it with shift modes. Keep it really straightforward. Like, did you find yourself wrestling with that a lot? Was that like initially you were like, I'm going to put a menu on and it's going to be and off we go? Or were you always very clear that was how you wanted to go about doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want a menu necessarily, but I definitely had more stuff on there at one point. I was looking through the previous panel designs today, because I have like a box full of old Proteus panels and the various versions that they went through. And there was one that was like 24 HP. It was like this huge honking thing with like a whole bunch of knobs. And I had to cut it down because obviously it was too big. I mean, also there's just a lot of like, in addition to the complexity, there's the physical user interface design, like how much space do I need between knobs such that it's comfortable to turn them and not like bump into the other knobs. Like you can put
the sausage finger quotient. That's very, very
That's right. And I think
fingers
actually,
and ham hands.
knowing you, Asadji, and you've got really big fingers.
I don't know what to do with that piece of information.
Wow.
I know where that was going.
Well,
I'm not a small human being.
Not a small human
Yes.
being, and I've heard you say a bunch of times, like, my big fingers can't get around these things. And so that made me like hyper aware of the fact that, like, I have average fingers, but I need to
Jonas did have Wookiees in mind when he designed the thing.
Yeah.
It does age me because it's like one of the first seasons from The Simpsons where Homer's wearing a moo dress and he can't dial 911 because his fingers are too fat, so it tells him to hang up and
I
try
was
again.
literally telling my wife about that episode last night. Random fact.
That's so good.
So ergonomics, we're saying. That's a nice way of saying Oski Digi has fat fingers. You designed for ergonomics.
Well, I've got a follow-up question on the ergonomics front, and it's also playing off our last episode where we talked a bit about this trend we saw at Superbooth, large modules like the new Chaos enormous four.
Yeah,
exactly, the 4-part delay. And we talked about who those are for, who might buy them. So here's the question for Blue Nautilus. Congratulations, this run sold out. Let's say your second run sells out. Let's say your third run sells out. Would you find yourself ever, do you think, tempted to make the 4-channel
This isn't a fair question.
36 HP
The Samarkand version.
quad Proteus? Look, we've got as you know, you've got the Qubit Bloom that's got a couple of them, right? You've got the Moog Labyrinth has two two generative sequencers that for some reason, and you can hear my opinion coming through on this, for some reason is attached to a somewhat decent West Coast synth. And then you've got something like Gamut Repetitor, which I believe is 4 channels, but, you know, somewhat limited controls. You've got a few. But could you ever see yourself making a Mega Proteus for those who are willing to spend $999 US and have all of these easy laid out controls on 4 interrelated channels, or channels that could or could not be interrelated, pure patch programming?
Right.
Not putting out your Christmas wish list there, Stu, at all.
I have a follow-up question too.
Well, it is a good question. Definitely, I've thought about it. To be honest with you, the one thing that really makes me not want to do that is thinking about the process of having to put those things together. You know, this is building these things myself took a long time, and you know, there's like 14 jacks and there's 8 pots, and you got to solder all those things on. And I have a day job. You know, this is not something that I do as a career. This is a side business for me. And so building the first batch took a long time. If these things were like 3 times the size, I can't
You'd have to hire up.
I'd have to hire somebody to do it. Yeah. So
then just add a quantizer or add multiple outs and just a couple of more controls.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Something like that could happen. Like, you know, like one more track with a couple more outs, maybe. I mean, here's my
chord outs.
Here's my other problem with that, is that it kind of like goes back to the issue of simplicity. I haven't really been able to come up with an idea of how to control the multiple tracks in a simple way without making it huge. So let's say even I add one more track. How do you manipulate the controls for those tracks? Do I have to add another knob for each function for that track, or do we have a switch and now we have 3 or 4 functions per knob?
Right.
I'm not really sure how to do it.
Fair. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess you can count on people using it with external chord generators or things like that if they want to do their own sort of voice expansion with it.
Also, they can buy 2.
Not anymore. Now they are.
That's my huge
now they're
observation.
unobtainium, so they cannot buy 2.
Yeah, that's the Moonbase Alpha approach. Just
buy 2. But you know, is there 1-to-1 parity with the hardware shipping version and the VCV Rack version?
No, because the VCV Rack version was made years ago, and the hardware version evolved over that time, and I haven't really backported all of those.
Is that something you've thought about doing?
I have thought about doing, and people have asked for it, and I think it would be nice. It's not a priority for me right now. I just don't know where to fit it in, but maybe someday.
So I have a question. I want to get into the weeds a little bit. So Stu J mentioned the Gamut Repetitor, which I believe is random quantized CV. And one of the exciting things or interesting things about Proteus is the musical aspect of the melody generation, where you're talking about how it's not just purely random, because purely random really isn't musical at all. Can you talk a little bit more about how you developed the algorithm and what musicality actually means in this context?
Yeah, that's something I think a lot about, and Proteus in some ways is like a first attempt at it. I don't think it's perfect, the algorithm, and really I just made some guesses, some hypotheses about how it might work, and it came out okay. And basically the way that it works is, first of all, it is quantized, so it's always picking from some kind of musical scale. But it's not picking evenly from that scale. So when you make a melody, you are not going to choose every note of the scale with equal probability. That's not the way music works, right? So they're weighted musical scales, so they have weights on them. That's one initial thing. And then to get really into the weeds, the way this thing works is essentially it's a Markov chain, which means that the probability of each note depends solely on the type of note that came before it. So there are a bunch of different things that can happen in a melody. You can repeat the same note, you can go up or you can go down, you can go somewhere completely else in the scale, and all of those things have independent probabilities in the algorithm. And that's how that complexity knob works. You basically change those probabilities. So for a really simple melody, you tend to get a lot of repeated notes, and that's where your kind of very simple baseline-y type melodies come from. And then we can have those more sort of arpeggiated melodies that make little runs up and down the scale, and that's in the middle of the complexity knob. And then there's some kind of balance somewhere up at the end. But as I said, like, this is a first attempt, and I actually have some other ideas about how to do it better that might come out in a future version.
One of the things that I really found fun was that the patience knob and the patience feature, and how it slowly loses patience and then decides, right, I've had enough of this melody, I'm bored now, I'm going to change it. Because, you know, when you look at something like this, by default we think, okay, this is an 8-step sequencer or a 16-step sequencer, or, oh, it's a shift register or Turing machine. Okay, now I know what that is. But it's neither of those things. It's something else entirely, it's its own thing. And I kind of wondered where the idea for the patience and the module kind of losing patience and then the visual feedback being such a fun part of it, where did that come from? Was that always there from the beginning?
Yeah, that was there from the beginning, because that was part of the idea that, you know, once a melody repeats too much, it gets boring. And the question was, how much is too much? And I experimented with a bunch of different functions for how that probability would increase over time. It's not a linear increase. So with a linear increase, you just get like a little bit higher probability that it changes each time. And if you do that, then you can often get melodies that just don't repeat very much at all. But really, you want it to repeat for some amount of time. You want to hear at least 2 or 3 or 4 repeats, and then for the probability to start going up. And so it's a special function that I used that has a kind of slow, shallow slope at the very beginning, and then at some point the slope of probability gets very, very steep, and it's almost definitely going to change at that point. And so it's really just a process of trial and error, of figuring out what sounded good and what kind of a function we wanted there.
Yeah, I really like how it interacts with the mutate parameter, because you can kind of balance the overall shifting, the sort of more drastic shifting with the sort of more step-based shifting. It's a really interesting, fun interaction.
Yeah, it's like, while we wait for it to completely change, let's have a little bit of interest going on.
Yeah, this is definitely sorry, Dad, I was just going to say, this is definitely a hands-on sequencer. This is an instrument that you've clearly developed to be played and interacted with. It's not a set and forget.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's interesting is, I think you've paired up sort of the web interface to the module in a sensible way, because a lot of modules now, when they become so complex, you almost can't do anything until you sit down on a web editor or a desktop editor and set up a whole load of parameters, which takes away from a lot of the fun. But in this particular case, it's more about, you know, those non-Western tunings. Yes, for those of you at home, we're thinking of a certain MIDI controller that both myself and Moonbase Alpha have just recently got, and yeah, it takes a fair amount of setup. But the question I wanted to ask was more around, like, I really was impressed at how you've thought about, like, not everybody in the world wants to listen to Western scales. Not everything is on that standard Western tuning. So let's support that in a very obvious way. Let's create these user-defined scales and these Scala files, because a lot of time, you know, you find modules have a predefined set of, right, these are all the scales you need, and it's your standard Western ones. Was that kind of driven by your background coming from, like, Indian-style music and playing the sitar?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, with that web configurator thing, yeah, I did want to make it so that you never have to use that thing if you don't want to. You know, going back to the simplicity thing, it's like, yeah, there are people that are going to want to change certain things and have more complicated settings, but let's hide that under the hood so that nobody has to deal with it if they don't want to. And when you go to that web configurator, you can change some of the very specific things that you might want to change, in addition to setting up those custom scales. And yeah, you know, I think that my experience with Indian music is that it doesn't actually use as much microtonal variation as people might think, at least in the northern Indian version that I learned. But I do know a lot of people that are really interested in that and would like to explore it, including one of our friends who was one of the beta testers. And so including the Scala file support in there, I think, was just like a fun little thing that we added at the end that's going to turn out to be really, really powerful for people.
Is there any particular modular developer company whose approach was somewhat of an inspiration, or whose design aesthetic resonated with you as you approached Proteus?
I'm sure I was influenced by it a lot. I mean, first of all, got to tip the hat to Tom Whitwell at Music Thing Modular for the Turing machine. The Turing machine is, one of the first modules that I got. I had already written the first version of Proteus, but it really just satisfied my thirst for some kind of generative music, and I think that thing is great. Even though there's just so many differences between Proteus and the Turing machine, the sort of inspiration behind it is definitely a driving force. I think I took some inspiration from Qubit with how they handled the USB and the web interface that they have. A little tiny unobtrusive USB stick in the middle of the module that doesn't bother you, but you can stick into your computer.
Thanks for not putting it on the back of the module.
Yeah, right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I would never use it if it were on the back of the module. So I loved that about the Qubit modules, just being able to pull that thing out of the front and stick it back in. And then, there are also a lot of negative inspirations, interactions I've had with modules where I was like, wow, I really don't want it to work like this, or like, this is not clear to me how things work from looking at the faceplate. And it really should be. I feel like you should just be able to look at the thing and figure out how it works without having to read a manual or, decode a hieroglyphic.
Feel free to name names and shame people. That's what we love to do.
No, we don't do that here.
So what module follows Proteus? Okay, there's a Proteus V2 with 26 channels and all those kind of things we were laughing about. But have you thought about taking your existing VCV Rack modules and porting them, or do you have some new ideas already cooking in your brain about the next thing you want to do now that you've got this out? You've got another great idea you want to go chase down.
The lowest hanging fruit for me is the existing VCV Rack modules, and I think the first one is probably Jawari, which I recently ported to the Noise Engineering Legio platform, and so it's basically hardware ready. I can easily make its own dedicated hardware.
It's lovely. It's absolutely lovely.
Yeah, thank you, Stu, for testing it out for me. I really don't. That's one where I love the sound of the Tempora, and it's like, I would make that for me. I don't know how many people actually want that sound and would use it in their systems. But
probably the same amount of people who want an 8-stage wave reanimator. We never know.
Can you give us some more detail about Jawari? I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, so it's basically a tempura machine, and tempura is an Indian drone instrument. It's a stringed instrument that's just for the purposes of making a drone, and it's got 4 strings, and you just kind of play them in a loop, and they make this long, drawn-out, buzzy kind of mystical sound that you often hear underneath, like an Indian vocal. It's used in Indian music as just like a ground bass. It's like you have an explicit tonic there all the time that you're referencing to the other notes that you're singing or playing on an instrument. And I always just love the sound of it. And there's an electronic instrument that Indian musicians use for practice called the tempura machine, which is just kind of like a little box that makes this sound when you turn it on, and also shocks you every once in a while when you turn it on.
Ouch.
Yeah, I bought one of these things in Bombay in the early 2000s and brought it home with me and got 220 volts into my finger every time I turned it on.
Well, that's refreshing.
But it sounded good, and Jawari is kind of modeled after that, like a little box you can just turn on that makes a version of this sound. And of course, there's some Eurorack additions to it that you can't do with the real instrument. You can actually volt per octave sequence it to change the pitch, which you don't do with a real Jawari, with a real tempura. It's not a melodic instrument.
I'm working on a video. I was hoping to have it done by now, but it was a little ill the past couple of days. But incorporating Proteus, Jawari, and your Acidus Versio.
Nice.
So it's a Seaside Modular celebration.
Awesome.
That sounds cool.
It does sound cool.
That reminded me of the question. Thanks, DJ. So when you were developing the Acidus, I remember I was talking, people asked for a few features, and you were talking to me about how little actual space you have for the code that was left over on the Versio platform. What's it like developing when you are within such a strict framework versus when you have your whole DAISY to develop on?
Oh, developing on an embedded system is different than developing on a computer. You really do have to be very stingy with the things with your coding. You can't really be a mess like I usually am. Like with things like memory, you can't just like allocate. This is getting really nerdy now. You can't just like allocate variables and then not clean them up, or use extra space for things.
You'll just run out of room.
You're just going to run out of room, exactly. And the Daisy is pretty good. It does have a decent amount of memory on there, and there's different kind of memory blocks that you can use. If you're creative, you can kind of figure out where to put things, and so yeah, that's definitely
how to efficiently use things more than reuse things, and it definitely makes you more efficient.
Exactly. And with that Acidus thing, I was porting somebody else's code, so I didn't have a lot of options. It was really just like take this thing and just squeeze it, pull parts out of it until it fits on there.
Well, I love that thing, man. That thing squeals.
Oh yeah, that's one of my favorite modules as well. And pairing it with Proteus at a high clock speed is that's what you want. Well, we're thinking of wrapping up now because we wanted to keep this to a mini episode. I suppose my closing question to you would be, what was kind of the biggest surprise going through this whole journey for you, from the initial crazy idea of I'll make a hardware module to sitting here today? What would be the one thing that surprised you the most?
I'm going to throw this back on you guys. And I'm going to say just like how supportive and helpful the community was. There were so many people that made this thing possible and helped me with it. You guys all devoted your time to testing it. SynthDad, you made an amazing video demonstrating how it works that everybody can now tune into and just see all the features of it. And so many other people gave me advice and gave me their time with helping with code or with answering questions about hardware, and just everybody's so encouraging and supportive about it that it's just been it's been an incredible amount of work, probably more than I expected, because there's so many this is the other surprising thing, it's just like so many little things you don't anticipate, like that you have to take care of to make this work, like the boxes to ship it in, and the packing and all this kind of stuff. That if I didn't have that warm support from the community, it would have been a terrible, thankless drudge, and it really wasn't. It was like a fun journey the whole time.
I have, it's not a closing question, but just a closing interesting fact that users or potential users of Proteus might want to know, specifically with respect to this first run. And that is, I would want people to know how close we came to those modules being lost in the fire. And tell me if I'm getting this wrong, Blue Nautilus, but you had ordered all of the parts, and then all hell broke loose, and you didn't know if those parts had melted into the ground, if they were lost, if they were otherwise unavailable to you. So I don't know if that's something you want to get into, but it was kind of like a great modular miracle that the parts, they've survived.
I know, it's a bit of a Phoenix situation.
Yeah.
Just so people are aware, when DJ says the fire, a lot of us in LA, if you hear the word the fire, that meant the Palisades and Malibu fires that heavily affected Los Angeles to start the year.
Yeah, to start the year, early January 2025 this year. The fire started very, very close to Seaside headquarters. We have a big plume of smoke up there, and my wife and daughter just kind of barely made it out of the neighborhood, and our whole community really did burn, and so many people lost their homes and businesses.
Brutal.
And we were just watching from far away, trying to figure out if our house was still there. And by some miracle, it did survive. And there were a lot of minor miracles there. Like, one of the shipments of all the Daisy modules was on its way to be delivered that day and was kind of missing for a long time. And the U.S. Postal Service found it somewhere, and I eventually got it. And so it was quite impressive. And so many people from the modular community reached out to offer me equipment if I needed it, or soldering stuff and oscilloscopes, and everybody was so great with that. And we're just amazingly thankful that everything survived and that we were able to move on.
Could have called it the Phoenix. Yeah.
Pokemon. It's got to be a Pokemon character.
I just wanted to say how much fun it is to use. I'm always on the lookout for things that can help me build systems of note and gate creation. And this is something that is just right up my alley in terms of how easy it is to set up and how interactive it can be even without plugging in a bunch of CV. It just feels very performance ready. And if you're not getting good sounds out of it, there's something wrong with you. It's not Proteus.
Yeah, don't blame the tool situation.
No pressure. No pressure at all. Thanks, Moonbase.
Yeah. No, I feel it's so unfair asking Blue Nautilus all these what's next questions, because literally I imagine he's just waiting for the first bug report to come in, and like that's all that's maybe on your mind right now.
I'm just thinking of, maybe you need to adjust the manual so at the end of it says, if it doesn't sound right, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah,
I do have a little thing there that at the last thing where it says, my module's bricked, it's not working, what's going on? And it says, we told you not to put it in the ocean.
Yeah.
It's a seaside theme. It's not literal though.
There you go. Yeah. A quick note for me is just the attention to detail. As I've seen you go through the process, is so interesting. If anyone has one of your blank panels, they can tell that there's texture on them. There's a lot of design thought that goes into really everything, even the little stickers you have on the box. So it's really neat to see, and I think that the community responded and they like it too. So just I'm excited to see some YouTube videos of this thing, man. Jeremy knocked out some great beats. DivKid had a mod bap, a kind of boom bap beat that I loved. I know I go that way, but I'm just excited to see this thing out in the world and see what pops up.
Thanks everyone for listening, and we hope you really enjoyed this special episode today on Proteus. Thank you so much, Blue Nautilus, for tolerating our questions and taking us on this journey over the last couple of years of your life, going from the original versions of VCV Rack to where we are today, with a little detour through the Palisades fire along the way, and also for just being such a nice guy working with us in the beta tester community and tolerating our seemingly stupid and silly questions every now and then. As always, we'll be coming back again with our next episode, where we'll be talking about the wider world of Eurorack. And if you're listening to us on YouTube, you can leave a comment down below and let us know what you think. Positive comments only, please. No. But also, we're on Instagram, the Rack Pack Podcast, and on podcast platforms. So by all means, give us suggestions for future episodes or let us know what you think. Thanks for listening.
Good stuff.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you, guys. All right.
Nice. Beautiful.
And we're out.
That was actually pretty good.
We're getting good at this.